Let's turn live right now to Capitol Hill. Senator Rob Portman joins us. He is a member of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Senator Portman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Michaela.
After you heard the president's address, you released a statement. I want to read it for folks here. You say the president has made clear the threat posed by ISIS and proposed steps to defeat it. Now we turn our focus to the execution of this plan. So evidently, you heard what you needed to hear from the president last night. Has he got you convinced? Do you think that your colleagues, fellow Republicans, will feel the same way? Or do you think they have the same concerns as Senator John McCain, that these will only be half measures?
Well, I'll speak for myself. First, I do think the president laid out a general plan in a speech last night that made sense. And as we've seen with the president's speeches, sometimes it's all in the execution, and sometimes that's been lacking. So, like John McCain, I'm skeptical, but I'm hopeful that the president will show some resolve here and follow through on what he said. Second, look, this is something a lot of us have been talking about for a long time, for the last couple of years, in terms of arming folks in Syria to be able to go up against this ISIS threat, and also with regard to the broader civil war there. And second is, a number of us were very concerned and said so at the time that we had pulled out of Iraq precipitously, and we had not left in place the intelligence and the trainers and the special ops to be able to deal with just this kind of situation. So I think it's late, but I do think that when the president says he's ready to start doing what we've been talking about doing for some time, that we ought to be supportive and ensure that he actually follows through on it.
You say you're skeptical, Senator. Is the issue just the follow-through, or is there something not in this plan that you think needs to be there? I mean, some people have suggested the president should be willing to use U.S., perhaps special forces on the ground in Syria or in combat roles in Iraq.
John, one of my concerns along with the president's statements and speeches is that he seems so interested in taking things off the table rather than putting things on the table. And again, last night, he takes great pains to say what he's not going to do in terms of combat troops. I don't think it's necessary to put combat troops in at this point, but I do think it's something that you want to keep your enemies guessing about, and frankly, I think the president makes a mistake in doing that. Second, he took great pains to take credit for bringing all of our troops out of Iraq last night, which is kind of ironic. The first part of the speech was about how great it was we took all of our troops out, when in fact that is the vacuum that was created that caused so much of these problems, in my view, including ISIL being able to move in with about 10,000 people at a time when, if we had had the intelligence, we would have known about it. If we'd had the special operators and the trainers who would have helped the Iraqis to be able to deal with that, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. Same with funding the opposition that's more moderate, the Free Syrian Army in Syria. So that's my concern. I just want to see some resolve. I want to be sure that the president knows that there are many of us here in Congress who do believe that this is a serious threat, and we're willing to help deal with that threat, but we need to be sure that he's going to show leadership as well.
Hey, Senator, could I just play you one bit of sound from Senator John McCain talking about this idea of residual forces in Iraq that you just spoke of? Then after we hear that, I want to ask you a question. Let's listen.
Thanks, John.
The alternative of leaving a permanent massive U.S. force on the ground in Iraq, not for 10 years, not for 20 years, but in perpetuity, is simply not sustainable financially, and it's not consistent with what the American people think we should do.
Senator McCain... Again, Mr. Carney misstates the facts. We had it won thanks to the surge. It was won. The victory was there. All we needed was a force behind to provide support, not to engage in combat, but to supply support, logistics, intelligence. And by the way, the Korean War, we left troops behind. Bosnia, we left troops behind, not to fight, but be for a stabilizing force.
Now, Senator Roberts, I want you to speak for yourself, not Senator John McCain. Your job is not to speak for Senator John McCain. But one of the things he mentioned was the residual force, the forces left behind in Korea, which was 50 years ago. The Korean War was 50 years ago. So if you were to leave troops in Iraq to keep the Sunnis and the Shias apart, to keep the Iraqi military consistently serving the Iraqi people, I mean, how long would you be willing to keep U.S. troops there to make sure that stays stable?
Well, first of all, I think there are lots of other examples. Let's look at Japan, one of our greatest allies, third biggest economy in the world, where we didn't keep troops there, but we had a presence there after the war to help them get back on their feet and to ensure that we weren't squandering all of our blood and treasure that we had sacrificed there. Same with Germany, certainly. So there are lots of examples of this. And I think John McCain's point is exactly right. Had we had a presence there, we would have had leverage on Maliki to avoid the sort of purging of the Sunnis that occurred, particularly in the military. And second, we would have had some trainers to be able to ensure that the Iraqi forces were up to the task. And then finally, the intelligence part of this. I mean, not to be able to monitor what's going on in that part of the world after we lost so many of our best and brightest in that conflict. You know, I have a military legislative assistant who was a captain in the Marine Corps in Iraq, and you can imagine how he feels about this. He lost members of his unit there. And as did, you know, many Ohioans gave their lives there in Fallujah, Anbar province. And when the black flag of al-Qaeda was waved several months ago over those cities, we didn't do anything. And the vacuum had been created. That shouldn't have happened in the first place. Once the vacuum was created, we should have acted sooner. Now the president is finally coming forward and saying, I see the problem, let's do something about it. And I'm willing to be one of those who says, yes, we do need to do something about it, and we do need to react. And I do believe the president has the authorization to act now with regard to Iraq. I believe going into Syria, he should come to Congress and seek a broader authorization, and specifically with regard to military helping to train Syrians to be able to take the fight to ISIS in Syria.
Senator Rob Portman, we appreciate it. We especially appreciate your thoughts when today this kind of conversation takes on extra significance on this 13th anniversary of 9/11. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Michaela. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.